With the summer sizzle starting to fizzle, cooler heads are looking to lock in a wellness routine fit for the fall and beyond. Lucky for you, Ritual's high standards don't drop with the temperature. Fully committed to traceable science and sourcing, Ritual is shaking up the supplement industry with high-quality ingredients and scientifically developed formulas. With them, you know what you're taking, where it comes from, and why it's important. They've got every base covered, from their clinically backed women's 18-plus multivitamin to groundbreaking options like stress relief and sleep melatonin, which both use first-of-its-kind bioseries technology designed to optimize formula delivery. And right now, for a limited time, get up to 40% off your first month at ritual.com/podcast. With the summer sizzle starting to fizzle, cooler heads are looking to lock in a wellness routine fit for the fall and beyond. Lucky for you, Ritual's high standards don't drop with the temperature. Fully committed to traceable science and sourcing, Ritual is shaking up the supplement industry with high-quality ingredients and scientifically developed formulas. With them, you know what you're taking, where it comes from, and why it's important. They've got every base covered, from their clinically backed women's 18-plus multivitamin to groundbreaking options like stress relief and sleep melatonin, which both use first-of-its-kind bioseries technology designed to optimize formula delivery. And right now, for a limited time, get up to 40% off your first month at ritual.com/podcast.
I'm Carla Ciuffo, and I'm a multimedia artist.
Hello, and thank you for downloading AART. This is the podcast where we get up close and personal with women from around the world of visual arts. I'm Chris Stafford, and this is Season 2, Episode 34. My guest this week is the multimedia artist Carla Ciuffo, whose innovative image-making process and utilization of experimental printing and installation techniques create a layered and immersive, often mystical environment. She says her approach treads the boundary between documentary and experimental arts. Carla was born in Long Island, New York, to father Armand, a dentist and artist, and Loretta, a homemaker and amateur photographer. She has two sisters who are also artistic. Adrienne is a documentary filmmaker, and Roberta works in the Nashville Arts and Arts Education. Carla attended some college but dropped out, then later proudly obtained her Harvard ID when she did a study residency with the Disease and Biophysics group. Prior to becoming a full-time artist, Carla worked a variety of jobs during her 20 years in New York City, from candy stores to book printing. In her 40s, she left New York for Arizona, where she trained as a massage therapist and became an entrepreneur, starting small businesses. From Arizona, Carla moved to Tennessee in 2010 to become a professional artist, and now an aspiring author of queer fiction. Carla and her wife Angela live in Nashville, Tennessee. Carla, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here.
Well, I think this is new for you, isn't it? You're not a big podcaster.
No, it's funny, though I listen to music, but I really have not listened to many podcasts.
So you have not been on many podcasts yourself then?
Oh, this is the first one.
Okay. This is your debut. Well, welcome to the wonderful world of podcasting, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you.
I look at your work. You describe yourself as a multimedia artist. It's fascinating to delve into it and wonder, well, how did she do that? So, of course, we're going to go back and find out what your journey was all about. But do you get that question of, what is this?
Yes. I get even, DMs, messages, emails. Could you describe how you put that together? I have to tell you, I'm a self-taught artist in all these mediums, whether it's working with, 2D, 3D animation. I've gotten a little bit into a lot into augmented reality, a little bit into virtual reality, because even with my art, whether I'm mixing illustrative work with digital illustration or whatever it is, photographic work. And I work by making mistakes. happy mistakes frequently, but making mistakes. And often when I jump from drawing to digital to drawing to digital, and then different programs that I use, and then maybe I'll animate it and I'll again use. So by the time it spits out, like the final whatever it is, I don't even know what I did. Like to go back and trace my steps would be nearly impossible for most of the work that I do. It's hard. So I was once asked, we have a local fine art printer here in Nashville, and they said, would you teach a class? And I said, I would. A, I don't have the temperament, but B, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So yes, I get asked a lot.
So these are happy experiments.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not afraid because I have a background in typography. I worked using, digital things different ways. I can't, it's funny. It doesn't frighten me to like look at a program and figure it out. And the fun of that for me is just doing whatever I want and looking and seeing how it turns out. So I'm a visual person. That's how I learn as well, very hands-on. So that's pretty much how I create the work that I do.
Where does your inspiration come from then, mainly, Carla?
I have to say peers. Years, I would have to say, it's nearly 20 years ago that my mother died. And when she died, she was an amateur photographer. And I was living in Sedona, and I was in the bathroom, and I looked up, and there was this absolutely incredible looking, completely formed heart. Sounds very soppy. It was on the skylight. So I grabbed a camera and I started shooting. And that was, I have a background in art. I was inspired, God, when I was just a kid. I had great parents. They were really cool, and they were very involved in all the arts in all different ways. And I'm very thankful and grateful to them for that. But I had an obsession at age 11 with Aubrey Beardsley. That was my hero. And always, art for me has been, I don't know, it's kind of been in the background. Sometimes it's everything. Now it's everything. So I was inspired by museums. My parents took us everywhere. We lived on Long Island. We were in and out of Manhattan all the time. They took us to museums and theater. There was a holographic museum that I couldn't get enough of. It was art that moved, or three-dimensional art that you could almost walk through. So those were inspiring moments to me. And again, trips through museums. My mom was very involved in appreciating the arts, as was my dad, in making art. So as I got older, and kind of it fell away from my life for a while, I got involved in other things. And I'd say probably about 15 years ago, or maybe 20 when Mom died. And then I started really teaching myself. I joined Flickr. That was years ago. And I started looking at other artists and chatting with them and looking at their work and, trying to replicate some of it that I saw that I liked. And then, we moved on, and it's been Instagram. And I have to say that my peers on Instagram, artists that I find, because I am kind of solitary, are inspiring. And also, the gallery that I was lucky enough to join in Nashville, Tinney Contemporary, working with them and other artists and local artists here in Nashville. So I have to say my peers. That's a long-winded way of saying my peers all inspire me. And my trip to the Chateau in March was beyond inspiring, because we all got to live with each other and live with each other's art. And we continue to months later, collaboratively. So there you go.
Well, you mentioned New York. So you're a New Yorker through and through.
Yeah, I was born and raised on Long Island, but as soon as I could move into Manhattan, I did. I lived in the same apartment on the same block in the West Village for nearly 20 years. And that was incredible. And I still consider even Nashville is kind of home away from home. New York is still, when I think of home, it is always going to be New York, and specifically New York City, which is where I spent a lot of my adult years. And I still migrate back. In fact, I have a trip planned in October to go back.
Tell us about your early memories of growing up then in New York. What was that like for you? You're one of 3 children, 3 girls. Where do you fit?
I am the cliche middle child. My sister Adrian is the cliche superachiever, as is my younger. Both my sisters are in the arts. Adrian's a filmmaker. Roberta attended Juilliard as a horn player, but she's now an officer of Tennessee Performing Arts Center. They're both multi-talented and incredible. I love my sisters. So, but I was the middle child, the problem child. In high school, I dropped out. I hitchhiked with my boyfriend trying to get cross country. I ended up in a summer program as a high school dropout at Oxford, or actually it's Cambridge. And then I took my SATs, got back into, I had a very convoluted growing up. My parents were saints, and it was a lot of fun.
You mentioned that being a proud moment for you when you dropped out. Were you something of a rebel?
Oh, yeah, I was a nightmare. But yes. And I had so much fun. I got it kind of all out of my system. Then I moved into the Village in my 20s, and I had a lot of fun too. But as I went to college, it was just it was a couple of years, and dropped out. And one of my proudest moments, I did a residency at Harvard, and it was amazing. There's Kit Parker, who's the Tarr Family Professor there, Disease and Biophysics Group, and he's also an inventor, and he comes from an artistic family, and his dream was like kind of meshing art with science. He's just an incredible human. And I had the good fortune to meet him through Susan Tinney, who owns the gallery that reps me in Nashville. And he had invented a nanofiber, a new kind of nanofiber. And it was inspired by cotton candy machine, right, and cuttlefish. This is the kind of brain he has. So to make a long story short, he invited me into his lab. I was the first artist to work, with this group, and to work with the nanofiber, turning it into art. So my proudest moment, which made my sisters laugh and laugh as well, like I had my Harvard ID, which I still have. And that was very cool. So yes,
obviously very proud of that.
Yeah.
Then, as well as dropping out, you're proud of getting your Harvard ID.
Very much so. That was probably more exciting than the whole experience. No, not really, but it was amazing. Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit further, Carla, if I may, to the early childhood, and what kind of things were attracting your attention. What were you drawn to? Were you drawn to the arts? Did you like to have a piece of paper and a pencil or colored pencils?
My mom says she never had to worry about me entertaining myself. Even as like a baby, they had those like things that dropped down from the crib, and I would like make stuff. All she had to do was plop me down with like oak tag and magazines. I remember no computers, and I would happily entertain myself like for, an entire day. I made things. I liked foraging. I grew up on Long Island, so I liked foraging for berries and sticks and mud. And I made my little sculptural things outside and brought them in. In high school, they allowed me, which still is amazing to me, I was able to drop like a science class and a math class and take double art. And one of my projects involved taking it was a mask of one of my friends, which my dad helped me. He was a dentist, and he had an office that was adjacent to the house. There were straws in her nose. And I made this life-size person sitting in a chair. And it was so enormous. It was down in our basement that my art teacher had to come to my house to grade it. But so I was always involved in art. But I have to say, I guess I'm a working artist. I'm very grateful for that. I am a working artist. And I also have to say that imposter syndrome is never far away, how you feel about yourself and your art. So I guess I was insecure about, my art or what I could really do with it other than have fun, as far as like becoming an artist, selling it. So I did other things. And so when I was a child, though, I was very drawn, like I tell you, Aubrey Beardsley, I was drawn to bizarre things, like bizarre art, deviant art, whatever. That was always something that just fascinated me and, the kind of art I was attracted to. So making different kinds, working in different mediums, I got into I hate to say macrame, but some of the stuff I look at when I was younger, it was like really, knotting rope and having these huge pieces that would be draped across our basement. That was just, so I look at the things I used to do when I was younger, and it's interesting to me. So yeah, it was, and my parents encouraged it. My parents very much encouraged it.
Yes, I was going to say that probably did come with a lot of encouragement because your father was an artist too. You describe as an amazing artist, so I want to hear about him. But tell me, were your siblings, were your sisters were you competitive with them, being the middle child?
Never. This is the interesting thing about the three of us, and other families I know that have siblings, they always know. I think we only became friends. I was the middle child. In high school, I rocked the boat in many different ways. Adrienne was already out of the house. My sister Adrienne was a Fulbright scholar. She was, she was, very, but out of my life, because there's a 5-year gap. And then Roberta, there's a 5-year gap the other way. And where I was I was really, I guess a wild child, and Roberta went to the opposite ends of the earth. Roberta had nothing to do with that. She saw kind of the wildness in me. However, she was a musician, French horn, and she sings, and oh my God, she's incredibly talented. She's amazing. But there was never competition between us. I think we were always...
With the summer sizzle starting to fizzle, cooler heads are looking to lock in a wellness routine fit for the fall and beyond. Lucky for you, Ritual's high standards don't drop with the temperature. Fully committed to traceable science and sourcing, Ritual is shaking up the supplement industry with high-quality ingredients and scientifically developed formulas. With them, you know what you're taking, where it comes from, and why it's important. They've got every base covered, from their clinically backed women's 18-plus multivitamin to groundbreaking options like stress relief and sleep melatonin, which both use first-of-its-kind bioseries technology designed to optimize formula delivery. And right now, for a limited time, get up to 40% off your first month at ritual.com/podcast.
We loved the success of each other and encouraged, each other to succeed. And now, starting many, many years ago, we're all really close, and I adore my sisters and have never once felt any kind of competition. We are so different in the things that we do, but I don't even think that would enter the arena. We're just always, kind of each other's cheerleaders when it comes to what it is we do in the world.
Let's talk about your dad, Aman. He did gemstone sculptures.
So he's a dentist, and, he had other interests, and all of a sudden he had a friend, I remember his name, Mr. Passamenti, and he was fascinated with the things his friend did, carving, and anyhow, he could just do, with minimal prep or instruction or whatever, he started making jewelry for my mother, really beautiful things. And then all of a sudden there was a workshop. He created this workshop downstairs, and he got all the tools, and he started sculpting these beautiful pieces by hand. Then he started casting things, and he was casting things in gold and silver and, very lifelike, amazing pieces. And he only made I don't know, I think altogether maybe 7 or 8. He just decided to do it. And then I think Dad got bored and then thought, okay, that's it. It was like painting. He painted a few things. My sisters and I have it, and then just thought. I even met, when I moved to Arizona, I met a collector, and he collected these gem sculptures, saw my dad's work and photographs, and begged. He said, just something small. And Dad wouldn't do it. He was done. But interesting to me, he could just do anything. He just chose not to. His interest level was for a certain amount of time. He did it. It was beautiful. He was done. So that was kind of my dad.
What was their background, Carla, in terms of their family background and your great-grandparents? Where did they come from?
So my father is Sicilian. He was born here, but then my grandmother took him back to Sicily for a couple of years, and then they came back to Brooklyn. She was a seamstress, and his dad was a printer. And interesting, because I was in typography. My grandfather, that's what he was. He was, a printer. When they did the hand typography. And my grandmother, very, very cliche Italian. He grew up in Bensonhurst. That's even where his practice remained. He had the office at home and then the office in Bensonhurst in the brownstone where he had grown up. It was interesting, my dad, because I think of the travel back and forth between Sicily and the United States, my father developed a stutter. And the way he got rid of that stutter was through elocution lessons, but singing. My dad worked his way through dental school singing in the Catskills. And where his brother, Anthony, who became a printer, we adored my uncle Anthony, but really sounded like he was from Brooklyn. No one could ever pinpoint where my father was from at all. He had absolutely no accent. And that was from getting rid of the stutter. My mom was like, seriously, campus beauty queen. She was beautiful, and grew up in Pennsylvania, went to school in Elmira, got a degree. But they met in the Catskills. There was a 10-year age difference, and it was very romantic. My father saw her, and that's the girl I'm going to marry. And that's what happened. So, and then they moved to Long Island. So those are my parents. And Mom, very eccentric. A friend of mine likes to say my mother kind of seemed like she had one foot on one plane of this world and one foot on the other. Which was sometimes challenging growing up and then really wonderful as we became adults, because she became, again, my mother was like my biggest, she was my biggest fan. And it was pretty cool. We got to be really good friends. So interesting parents.
Were you close to your grandparents at all on either side?
Not really. My mom's mom, my grandfather on my mother's side died young. My grandmother came to live nearby us, and she was, she loved us, but she was tough, so I never got close with her. And my Italian grandmother, I so wish she could speak English, but I never learned Italian. And also, I didn't spend a whole lot of time with her. She did teach me to embroider and to sew, which is something I'm now integrating into my art. And she was an independent woman, and I wish I got to know her way better than I did. My grandfather, my Italian grandfather, died before I was born, so I never met him.
And so you never got to speak Italian, but do you go back to Sicily to visit your heritage?
I've only been to Italy once, and that was to Rome. However, it was last July. I had a group of cousins, and they were several generations who came to visit. They came to New York because there are a group of people in New York. They came to Nashville. We had an awesome time. They visited my sister in San Francisco. So I have since reconnected with several of my Sicilian relatives, and that's been great, who are artists, musicians. So, it was very cool. Yeah.
Very much in the genes then, this artistry.
I think so.
So what was your first job then, Carla?
Oh, my first job was in high school, like a candy store where I ended up, I had several weird jobs. I think I worked for Avis like for a while. Then I went into New York and I ended up working for the airlines for quite a while. And then I leapfrogged from airline, which was nice because I got to travel into typography. And then I ended up running the art department for the American Institute of CPAs, which was very interesting. Doing a lot of book publishing, hiring a lot of artists, doing a lot of printing. So I kind of had that background. And then I left completely. I moved to Arizona. I went to massage school. I got a degree in massage therapy. I opened up several businesses, ended up in Nashville, and then finally focused once I ended up at Tinney, just focused completely on the art.
What kind of businesses did you open?
I opened spas because I have the background in massage therapy. And I have to tell you, do a shout out to Olive Body Bar here in Nashville, which my dear friend and business partner owns. I no longer, I no longer am a part of it, but it's won awards. It's fabulous. So I have done, I have that, that's what I did in New York. I had a business in New York. It was quite a ride. But I finally, when I moved to Nashville and, also, bodies break down. There's only so much you can do for so long. Massage is intensive, especially the kind, we were focused. It wasn't, as they say, fluff and buff. And then I started really intensely focusing on the art. I think what got me into the art, I got to Nashville and I was really fascinated with the fairgrounds here. And always since I was little, there's always been something frightening and wonderful and strange and scary and beautiful about fairgrounds. So I started exploring them, shooting at them, and I did this really colorful series. And the last moment, I applied to Arts at the Airport, an amazing program that they have, for hanging art. And I was accepted. So I had these huge, large format images. I called it Thrill because it was really, to me, fairgrounds are kind of thrilling experiences. And then a good friend of mine, who is an amazing photographer, Robbie Quinn, who lives in New York, but he was living in Nashville, saw some of the work and he said, let me introduce you to Susan Tinney. She has just the most incredible gallery here. So excited. We got all my stuff. We brought it to Susan and Susan just looked at it and said, very nice. I don't know what to do with this. So I was rejected. And then, at that point, I thought, I think someone had said, well, it's so colorful and that was the point in my life where I decided to challenge myself and I became a little bit more introspective about what it is I was doing. And I was always fascinated with negative space. I always kind of wish when I would get attention that I could make myself into a little dust ball and kind of blow underneath the sofa or something. There's something about wide expanses of negative space. So I started stripping things down, and it took me months. And it brought me to, I guess, what I consider one of my more prolific work, which is my stasis series. I started learning about stasis and these moments in between where nothing happens. And that's kind of what I created the artwork. And I was, at that point, I'm not active on Facebook anymore, but I was posting it on Facebook and I got a message from Susan who saw my work and said, I'm very interested. Let's talk. And that was the beginning of me focusing on my art. And then the series that I still go back and forth. I create new things, I add, so that was kind of the moment when I, started really thinking, well, maybe I am an artist.
So going back to that first piece, when they didn't know what to do with it, I'm curious as to what mediums that you were using. But tell me first how you decided this is what you were going to do. When you make that start in art, sometimes we start with a pencil and then we start with, paint and
yes.
grow from there if we're going to be a painter per se. So how did you first start there?
I was shooting. So my little camera, I was using that, and I would go to these fairgrounds. Then I was completely fascinated with texture and light and how I could actually transform these photographs into things that were, to my eye, more appealing, that gave them dimension. That, so I, again, learned, I opened up my first, it was like Photoshop, and I started shooting texture, and I started shooting light, and then I started laying that over my images, and then I started playing with everything. Again, couldn't even tell you, I would have one file that had, 145 layers to it. And then I would start eliminating things and focus in on two little people that were just kind of flying in the air with negative space and, their gestures and add. So anyhow, it was just pleasing myself, the things and bringing more fantasy into the photographs. I think that was also a big draw for me. I liked making things more fantastic looking, and also adding the texture and figuring out how to take things away or add them in at will. And that's what created the series for me. And it was a really fun series. I even look at those pieces now and I think, I can see why. And then I went all the way over to the other side. It was all, very neutral, very, also, there was somebody who reviewed the work when I first had the show, and they said there's a dangerous kind of thread. You don't know if these are divine beings or if they're kind of hellish, these little figures that are floating in space, which is exactly how I felt when I was creating it. There's always, I guess, even in my drawings, there are flip sides. There's the light and the dark. So anyhow, did I answer that?
Yes, you did. And I'm wondering because often, and this is why I find this podcast particularly fascinating, because we get to know the women behind their art. We get to know what kind of person is reflected in the art. What does the art say about the artist? And I'm wondering what your friends and partners and family would say about your personality and how that is portrayed in your art.
I am a nurturing person. I think I was, again, that middle child thing. But I also, as we all do, the dark side, I don't even know what to call it. I don't want to say I'm not optimistic. I just frequently see both sides, and I'm often drawn to both sides. Like a series that I did when I went to the chateau in March, I'm still working on it. It's this huge tapestry, and I was really, the whole Gods and Monsters, Lana Del Rey, song. And that's kind of how I view the work. And I don't see monsters as being all bad. So I enjoy inserting them into my art in different ways. And there's something comforting to me about that monster being there. I don't know if it's just often seeing the flip side of things. So I don't know, my friends, we all have kind of crazy senses of humor, which we enjoy.
You mentioned you're extrovert, introvert as well. So would we see that in some way interpreted in your art?
For sure. Yes, I think when people meet me, because I can really talk a lot, one-on-one, they're often surprised when then I retreat. My wife, is very different. She's very extroverted. She loves socializing. And frequently when people meet me, the first thing they hear, you're a real person. You're not, I don't know how many times I've heard that. So, I've been that way since I was a kid. I was a really shy kid. I'd go to kids' birthday parties and make my mother stay and sit on her lap. I was really, then when I got older and I did have friends and I made friends fairly easily, we would have a birthday party at my house. And at a certain point, I'd march upstairs and tell my parents, tell everyone to leave now. I'm done. I had enough. They can all go home, which is kind of how I am now. So I think no one is surprised at the work that I produce. I think, kind of fits my personality. I always have. I mean, look at Aubrey Beardsley. That's who, as a kid, I was attracted to.
What kind of films would you be drawn to then? Any sci-fi? Do you like a little bit, something edgy? I
do. I'm very drawn. During, COVID, I think I watched every Marvel film that ever came. Doom Patrol. I was very big on, I like fantasy. I've always been big with fantasy. The kinds of, I like so many different kinds of things. It's interesting. But yeah, and as a kid, I would say, when the whole Star Wars series started, all of that. So I am drawn to sci-fi. But also, I'm trying to, it's even with my music or even with art, I'm drawn to so many different kinds of things. There isn't really one, I guess, because my partner is, English. I grew up, like so many of us Americans, we love English, whether they're sitcoms or shows or whatever. So with Angela, we watch a lot of British stuff. QI is like probably one of my favorite shows. So it's a good laugh at the end of the day. So I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned music there because I wanted to come to that. You are also a pianist.
Yes, I am. How did you know that?
And this is something I would imagine would have been encouraged as a child too, since you came from a very artistic and talented family.
Yes.
Did you learn at a very young age?
Very, very young. So her name is Felice Bedrosian, and she was a great pianist. She was a great instructor, and she lived in our neighborhood. My parents knew the Bedrosians, and she would only take adult students who were concertizing. But she said my mom kind of pushed the issue. She said she would kind of test me out and maybe place me with one of her students. So I went, I was so young, and she just took me on. And I have to tell you, though, they weren't my happiest years playing piano. I have a friend who's an awesome pianist, but she can play by ear. She was having a lot more fun as a kid with me. I was being kind of trained in this very classical style. We would have these concerts. I was like in, third or fourth grade, and there were all adults that were playing. I'm terrified, but I would get on stage and I would play. And Felice was really grooming me, I guess, to become either concertizing or perhaps, teach. So I stayed with her till I had a voice in leaving. And I guess also when, the rebellious part of me started showing up, I was in high school when I decided to stop. And I remember my mom crying, but that was it for me. I just decided I wasn't going to play anymore. And I really, really didn't. I did lug my piano around with me for many years until I guess it was living in Arizona when I finally sold it, because I had really stopped playing it. And now I'm terrified to go back to it. I mean, I was like, I don't know, I was like 11 years old playing Chopin's Polonaise. I had these teeny weeny little hands, but even now, like my span is pretty big. I guess that's from the piano. So yes, I did play piano and then I stopped playing piano.
Why do you fear it now? What would it take to get you back to playing again?
I fear sucking at it. Like I fear sitting down and not having whatever spark it was that I had, that I didn't even really recognize when I was little, because it was such a chore. The scales and the things I had to memorize and practice time was hours. I fear that I wouldn't be able to. I think it's the fear of not being able to, which keeps me from. It would be an interesting exercise to finally confront the piano.
Yeah, face that fear again, because it sounds as if there's a lot of buried talent there then that could, if you emerge again as a pianist, provide another soundtrack to your life now.
That would be very cool. Maybe I will.
We'll dial back in a couple of years' time then, see if you've revisited this, Carla. How about that?
Okay. That sounds good.
I want to go back, if I may, because your resume on your personal side says married to 3 men, and now you're married to your wife, Angela. So you've had a very interesting love life. And you mentioned how you went from Arizona to Nashville. So was that a relationship move? Tell us more about that.
No. I mean, I guess had I grown, if I was young now, I think my life would have been, I would have made different choices. I wouldn't be labeled. I guess in my own personal being, label myself, I don't know, pan, bisexual, whatever. But yeah, growing up, I dated men and women. I did end up marrying several, which was, kind of stupid. But there you go.
How old were you with your first marriage?
Oh, God, I think I was barely 20, 21. And then, yes, they didn't last very long, and they were all really lovely guys. And I have to say that I did remain friends with two of my exes, and I have friends, with many of my exes. Angela and I met when she was visiting good friends of mine, a friend of mine who was also an artist, who lived on the opposite side of the brick wall on Grove Street when I was living in the West Village. And Angela had her own jewelry store in Covent Garden. And she would come back and forth. And anyhow, that's how I met Angela. So I was actually still living in New York. And we dated for a year, flying back and forth, until finally we decided we were serious enough that Angela sold her business, sold her house, and moved to New York. And then poor Angela, shortly after that, got whisked away to Arizona, where we ended up, living for a while. So, yeah.
When you say that you would do things differently, how would you reset when you look back at your life, Carla?
Well, I'm glad I grew up how I grew up. I wouldn't want to change that, but I think there's a certain amount of freedom, of expression, certainly in sexuality, certainly in all these different areas that affect people's lives. I think that I wouldn't have been drawn into like marriages. And I think artistically, I might have perhaps been brave enough to explore that more, instead of just kind of treating it as something that was unattainable. I wish I could have been a young artist, I guess, pretty much exploring that part of me. And I think that would be one big reset. It's interesting when you have a limited time now on the planet, it makes time that much more precious. And it's lovely when you're young to kind of have that expanse of time ahead of you. And again, not wanting, because I had so much fun and I still have so much fun. And there's so many things that I'm doing even right now and things that I'm looking forward to doing. But I think that would have just changed a lot of decisions that I made had I been growing up now.
Yeah, it's a generational thing, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely.
Things are so very different now. You would like your life to have been much more of a free artistic spirit.
It was just for me, I think it was, they were very grounding humans, these people. And I thought for me, it's like, I need some grounding. But the back door was always open. Like I always ended up I was a terrible person at relationships, really, really terrible. And, for me, we all make mistakes. We all make choices, especially, when we're young. And I think for me, the whole marriage thing, for some reason, I felt like it would be a grounding experience, however that sounds. And of course it wasn't. So, wasn't meant to be.
Now, being of Italian ancestry, you might be described as maybe passionate.
Yes.
When you're talking about your art, do you feel that it's portraying your passion?
Yes. And I always say, I'm lucky to be a working artist. I do sell my art, but if I never, ever sold anything else again, I would still be making it. I think it's passion and perhaps even a little bit obsession. Like even what you see on my Instagram is my journal. So many of, what you see, I mean, some are things that take me months and months and months. Sometimes I'm working on something for years, but often it's like waking up in the middle of the night and the compulsion is to draw emotions. And then I'll post it. It's like a kind of an emotional, journaling experience. So I have to say, yeah, I am very passionate about the art. And I feel like I'm so lucky that I have it. I'm so lucky. That's how I feel.
Do you have any idea what you would have done if you didn't have your art?
No, I really don't. I don't even go there.
It's so important. It's a really an important part of your very being.
It's huge. It's really huge, only because it is a place. It's a community, and that community is incredible. It also is a place to, I don't know, as you say, grow. I'm writing now. The whole, sculpting, creating a studio. I love the fact that I can do whatever I want, because you really can. I guess that's where the music, I draw that line, and I should maybe erase it and maybe move forward and see what happens if I try to make music again. But the art, I feel, is just like the universe. You can just go on and on and on and do whatever you want. And I think at the beginning, I was so worried, my art has to look a certain way. No one's going to recognize me at all. And I'm so far away. And on the other side of that, just do whatever you want. That's how I feel now. So, yeah, I don't think I could. I wouldn't want to live without it. It's however I would need to live, I would want it to be a part of my life.
So when you turn the lights off in the studio at the end of the day, where does the most satisfaction come from?
Oh, my family. I mean, Angela, we have a dog and a cat. I've always had animals. My animals are a big part of my life. My fur balls. I think also my house where I live, I'm a nester. Again, that maybe comes from the introverted. I like, being in my house. I love being with my family. And I always have. I've loved hanging with my parents. When I was even living in the city, I would go home weekends and hang with my family. So I think family, my, nuclear family, is a big part of kind of the joy that I get out of life, including my fur balls, my animals.
How about cooking? Are you the Italian chef?
Yes, I used to cook. I used to cook a lot. I mean, really a lot. When Angela came over to the U.S., I don't think she knew how to boil an egg. I mean, make tea, I guess. Angela has since become the most amazing chef. So Angela does a lot of the cooking where I'm free to do other things. But yeah, cooking is fun. I used to be a big gardener. Now, not so much, but I used to love, getting dirty in the earth. But yeah, no, cooking in my family, everyone cooks. Everyone does. My younger sister is great. She doesn't like, cooking. Adrian's amazing. My parents, both of them, were great. We were liked cooking, whether it was, outdoors, in the kitchen. So yes, my grandmother, when I used to go to my Italian grandmother, Ippolita Buffa Ciuffo, that was my grandma's name. There was pasta hanging all over the place. And my grandmother used to make her own pasta. It would be drying all over the kitchen. So yeah.
Now, they say never talk about politics and religion to friends, but we do on this show, Carla, because it often informs our art. How does it inform you, if it does indeed at all? What are the influences?
I believe in the universe. I believe in people. I believe in energy. I believe that nearly anything is possible. I'm not religious. So I don't subscribe to any particular belief. I mean, I guess I grew up Catholic, that's my parents, were Catholic, Roman Catholic, but yeah. So I still believe, I would love to believe in the different time lapses and how Marvel, you can just die and pop up in another timeline. That would be awesome. But I just believe in the universe, and that it's a really comforting place for me. Spaces. My friends always make jokes like, if you were fit and if you could just go out, and leave and, get on a rocket ship and go to Mars, absolutely. I would do that in a heartbeat. Even at the end of even if I knew life was going to end, I would do that. So yeah. And, and as far as politics go, I believe in social justices and I believe in diversity and I believe in, so you can kind of see where I lean. Yeah. So I'm, definitely, it's been hard, the last 10 years and I'm hopeful right now. So that's where I'm at.
Now, what about books? What do you like to read? And is poetry included?
Yes. I mean, poetry recently, only because I had the pleasure. I had a very strange interlude where New York Times called me. It was kind of like, I don't know if it was during lockdown, before lockdown, maybe a little bit before COVID hit, and said, would you shoot for us? And I guess the reason why they did that, to go back to when I got to Nashville, because my sister is immersed in the arts, and she got to know someone at Gibson, and her brother was Buddy Miller, and he played with Emmylou Harris. And then because I'm so involved in animal rescue and stuff, our spa ended up doing many different fundraisers. They were called Miracle of Music Row for Emmy. And then I started shooting these artists. And then all of a sudden, Bonnaroo, which is I don't know if you're familiar with Bonnaroo, but they're just a huge music festival, world renowned, that takes place every year in Manchester, Tennessee. And in conjunction with Arts at the Airport, it was their first call to artists, create hanging sculptural something that would hang at the airport. And I'd already had a show at the airport, which was successful. And I thought, well, gee, what can I do? So I took these images of Emmy and Buddy Miller and Roddy McDowell, all these people that I had shot, and I created the concept of these huge lenticular panels of these artists that would change when people walk through the airport. If they're looking up and they moved, the artwork would change, which is what lenticular art does. And I presented that, and Bonnaroo accepted it. So then I had the opportunity. Elton John was the headliner. I got to shoot Elton John and all these other, amazing performers, and then I created art and ended up at the airport for like a year. Was only supposed to be there for a certain, and then Country Music Hall of Fame came in, and they took nearly the entire body of work of the portraiture that I had done, and it's since become part of their permanent collection. So it was this like really weird journey, and I guess the editor at the Times had seen some of that stuff that I'd shot. And there's a person I follow who's just, I feel, an iconic writer. Her name is Margaret Rankel, and she writes an op-ed piece every week in the New York Times. And I got an email saying, will you shoot for Margaret? And anyhow, I ended up doing that for a couple of years. And also, they asked me to shoot an award-winning poet. Her book had just come out, and her name was Ada Limon. Ada, after that, so I did this whole portraiture. It's beautiful. She's another incredible human being, so talented and beautiful inside and out. And it was a beautiful, beautiful piece in the Times, with a lot of images and Ada speaking her poetry. And of course, then I started reading her poetry. And she has since become our nation's poet laureate, and she's in her second term. So I have had really weird, wonderful things happen. And you asked me poetry. That was my long roundabout way of getting to, yes, I'm recently reading poetry. And also Joelle Taylor, who I follow, who I love. And she's got this, her voice. I haven't read her new book yet. Angela's reading it, but I've read her other. And I just even did something kind of like a homage to Valentine, one of her kind of partial poem from her book. And she allowed me to put my imagery to her voice, not her voice, her actual voice, but her voice in words. So yes, there's some poetry that I read. As far as books, I am all over the place. I'm a voracious reader. And I have since learned about like romance. So where never, ever would I thought I would have ended up enjoying romance. But in addition to everything else that I read, which is just, again, so much, that is also entered. I think that happened during COVID. But anyway, so yes, I do read a lot.
And you also write. You're into writing a book, I hear.
And I will only say it's a queer sci-fi romance. That's it. That's all I will say right now. I'm still writing it.
Okay. That's all we're going to get, is it, for now? Okay. Well, we will have to circle back, Carla, because there's all kinds of things that you may do that we need to catch up with down the road here. But just finally, a couple of questions. I'm often curious, when we get so tied up in our art, it's so important to us that we are drawn to doing it every day simply because we can't help ourselves. Is there a day where if you didn't do your art, what would that look like? What kind of relaxation or activities would make the perfect day for you outside of the studio?
The perfect day. It would be me, either one of two places. I travel to Arizona. I mean, it's actually been several times a year. I lived in Sedona. I lived in Tucson. I love the desert, whether it's piney northern desert or the saguaro, in southern desert. And I make the trip usually with my sister. We are perfect travel companions. So I think a perfect day, if I could plant myself anywhere, would be in Flagstaff, would be, walking, not so much hiking anymore, but walking through the city, traveling to different spots, walking through Sedona, walking around Bell Rock in Sedona, being in Jerome. There are different places. They're absolutely my happy places. My really big happy place is Meteor Crater, which is right outside Winslow, Arizona. I could probably stay there for hours on end.
There's not much to see there.
It's the most peaceful, incredible. And that crater, the history, and then when you can imagine everything that happened leading to that crater, making that, I'm so that kind of, whether it's, walking all around Arizona observatories. I love observatories, spending time there. I had the good fortune to spend like an entire day at Kids Peak where there was practically no one there. And that was incredible. Or stick me in the middle of Manhattan, put me in the Strand. I'd be very happy staying in the Strand. That's what I did last time I visited. We were probably in the Strand for about 4.5 hours. So yeah, if I wasn't drawing, I guess walking around Manhattan or tooling around Arizona would be quite nice.
Now, you mentioned during your photography that you got to photograph Elton John. If you look back at the events of your life, can you pull out a couple of cool moments for us?
Core moments. I would have to say my first show at Tinney Contemporary, where we had some red dots on the wall before we even opened. That was incredible. Scary, incredible. And that was my Stasis series. That was really feeling, I don't know, I can't even describe the feeling having that show. I think shooting these artists, I would have to say, having Bonnaroo send me to Caesar's Palace and having like the time that I had with Elton John, and then having that, there was one shot, it was the very end, and his group was just so accommodating and so lovely. And at the very end, I said, okay, so this is going to be movement because this is going to be, I kind of explain lenticular art. It's going to be moving. And he did his Hercules pose, put his arms up in the air and kind of, that was just amazing, that shot. So that was kind of a moment where I thought, oh my God, I'm like Caesar's Palace shooting Elton John for Bonnaroo. That was pretty weird. I think also, Harvard, working shoulder to shoulder in the lab with those graduate students who were just, they took me, I was so nervous because I felt so stupid. And after a day in the lab, they were so giving, and every problem that we ran into, we solved together. And they were so interested in teaching me how to work with this material. And it was incredible. That was an incredible moment. You're talking artistic journey. Those are moments that I will never, ever forget. I think some of the work that I've done, like corporate work, we have this installation here in Nashville in this lobby, and it's 300 pounds of my art. It is all abstract. It's beautiful. These thick acrylic blocks. I think once we got that installed, that was like a feeling of accomplishment. And I think the last really being at the residency in France, that I thought the only residency I really want to go to, and they get, 30,000 applications a year, and they go through everything. And getting that email a year after I applied saying congratulations, was just amazing. And then actually attending was equally, maybe more amazing. And I guess those are some of the big, kind of Yahoo moments.
So what next?
Well, one of my incredible commissions is working with Norwegian Cruise Lines. They've placed art. They have a series of new ships. 2 have come out, and we're working on the 3rd ship right now, which is Aqua. So I'll have 19 pieces of art that will be, and they're all pretty much Stasis related, that series. So it's always really kind of fun to see so much art and so beautifully presented in one space. So that's coming up this year, where we're working on that. I have a collaborative work, a mural that we're hoping to do in Nashville with artist Courtney Miner, who just had her first solo show in New York. She's had a piece accepted into a museum recently. She's a dear friend. And someone I met at the residency, and Leah Craigie, who's, I think, one of the most prolific mural artists right now. She's just working like crazy. She was also awarded like a visual arts award in Washington, D.C. just very recently. And we're looking at doing a mural here in Nashville, the three of us together. And then I had a piece in Paris at a gallery, and we were talking about perhaps doing a swap, having French artists come here to Nashville and a certain group of Nashvillian artists going to Paris. And we're looking at that, of course, like much later in 2025 or 2026. So those are things that we're exploring right now, kind of on the horizon.
Lots to look forward to then, Carla.
Yes, always.
Well, thank you for making your podcast debut with us here. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
And thank you, Chris, for inviting me. Thanks so much.
And to see Carla's artwork, you can visit her website and social media. We'll have links in the show notes for both of those and also for our social media at Instagram. And if you'd like to reach us via email, you'll find that address in the show notes too. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, we would love it if you would leave a review and 5-star rating, because that increases our visibility on Apple Podcasts and, of course, then helps others find the show. And we'd love it if you would share this with anyone that you think might enjoy the show as well. My thanks again to my guest this week, Carla Ciuffo, and to you for listening. I'll be back next week when my guest will be the British makeup artist Patsy O'Neill. So I do hope you'll join me then.